Alright, so today we got the old 74 F100 that pretty much I've just built out of old spare parts. I dropped my little 289 in here just to get it running, as I needed to use the bed to move up here to school to my apartment for my senior year. So I don't really have that many tools. This is kind of what I'm working with, but I'm going to install today a one-wire alternator. This alternator here is starting to make a good bit of noise. You know, try and ignore my mounting stuff here. Like I said, I just make it out of spare parts. But my bearings are starting to make noise in it, and I went to replace it, and it's only 40 amp. And that's not very much. I'm running electronic ignition in here and some other stuff, pretty good radio. And puts quite a power draw on the battery when I got all that run at night with my headlights and all that going. So I'm gonna go ahead and get that yanked off, and this is a 100 amp alternator, so it ought to do quite a bit better, and should be pretty easy to wire up. So we'll go ahead and get this alternator taken off and get moving. Alright, so I'm about to get this alternator taken off, and just here's a quick listen to the bearings in it. It has a ton of input play. So yeah, if your alternator does stuff like that, you know, and you can't hear it very well right now for some reason, it's probably because it just rained earlier, so it's got a little bit of water that's cutting the noise, but bearings are pretty shot in there. So anyway, if your alternator sounds about like that, you should probably think about replacing it. Okay, so now we got the alternator off. I forgot to mention that you always want to disconnect your negative battery cable in case, you know, you don't want to just electrocute yourself or do any electrical damage. Obviously, you're not going to kill yourself with getting electrocuted with 12 volts, but it's not pleasant. So anyway, pretty simple. You know, the Ford wiring at least, where you know, black to black, orange to orange and all that. But in the end, we're not going to use this again, so we're probably going to tape it up to avoid corrosion, get it out of the way. But pretty much that simple, and your alternator's out. But yeah, pretty much that's that. We'll first we'll get our one wire alternator hooked in there, and then we'll run our wiring. So that one is definitely done, and it looks like it was the original. It says Motorcraft on the back. I would not be surprised, because ever since I got this truck 6 years ago, it's been that alternator. So anyway, moving right along. Okay, so here we have our one wire alternator, and this is after running and driving it for a few days, because I kind of wanted to, you know, use it a little bit before I went and gave you all false information here. So it's key to have your belt in line and tight, and we can see that we got all that set up right with our proper amount of washers. So I could tighten the belt up a little more. It could definitely stand to be a little tighter, but it's good for now. You can see here we got our 8 gauge wire running to our positive battery terminal, and you know, try and ignore all these extra wires we got running. I did a lot of the wiring on this truck when I was 17, and then it sat for years. So I haven't got to putting in a fuse box in it yet and getting rid of all this massive wires. But anyway, you know, you just wire it right into the positive terminal. And again, it's 8 gauge wire, and then there's a ground tab off of the back of your alternator, and you want to send that to the ground of your engine. Technically the alternator is grounded through itself, but this is an extra measure, and of course I totally think you should do it. So it's technically a 2-wire alternator, but on the Ford you have a ground right down here, so that makes that real easy and real simple. So it's been charging good, and I'll start it up and show that in a second here. So engine's been doing really good on it, and what I've actually experienced is with having more voltage out of my battery. Now before I only had like 13.2 or so. It wasn't charging very good. What I've kind of cut on to with this electronic ignition and just a lot of your aftermarket electricals that wouldn't have been on this older stuff back in the day, it's real advantageous to running a higher amp alternator. I think this is 100 amp, and what I had before was a 40 amp. And so the engine just overall runs better, and I've checked my power to my coil up there, and I got a little more voltage running through it. So it seems that at night when I had my lights on, all that stuff, that I was, you know, must have been running off my alternator more than I'd have liked. But right now we're cruising around, the battery's charging at 14.2 to 14.5, which is a little high, but I'm not too worried about it. So it's doing its job. It's getting full charge now, and you can totally tell in the way the vehicle runs. Idles a lot smoother and just seems to have a little more power through the ignition. And that's not what you'd commonly see with this upgrade, but you know, if you're running a lot of electricals like I am, you know, like an MSD ignition box, you know, that's going to make a big difference in keeping your voltage up. You know, as a 40 amp, just, you know, back in the day, there wasn't that many electricals on the vehicle. So that's why today most cars have like 120 amp alternators. But all that aside, so these are pretty interesting how they work. So they kind of sense when they're not rotating anymore, and they'll kind of shut off. And I'm not really sure how they do that. It's just kind of from my observations, but it seems like if you flip something on and put a load on the battery, it'll flip a solenoid on inside this alternator, and then it will draw power. And that happens because an alternator needs power to make power. So anyway, but if that didn't happen, it would be drawing power all the time and you'd kill your battery. So that's the way I understand that it senses power, which makes sense, because when you go to start your car, that battery is going to have a, you know, that voltage is going to dip, and that's what, you know, lets the alternator know what's going on, and then it kicks on. But yeah, anyway, overall, pretty good. It's pretty amazing. If anyone else has any, you know, I'm no expert, so if anyone claims to know exactly how these work, that's just from my observations, but they work real good. And when they overcharge, they bleed down, and I'll show you that. But yeah, anyway, we'll start it up and run it. We'll see the charging, then we'll shut her down. So overall, I'm pretty happy with it. Pretty easy install, and I think a replacement alternator was 60 bucks and this was 80 bucks, so completely worth it. Okay, so here we have the one-wire alternator after it's been sitting for a few days. And like you saw, the bleed down where it's well above 12, almost to 13 volts, and it'll start dropping. We can see here that it steadies out, and I've done this a few days now. It's somewhere usually in between 12.4 to 12.5, and it's never really drawing any more power than that. Sitting for 3-5 days, it's always the same. So somewhere between 12.4 and 12.5. And what I've also done is I've left some accessories on to see if it would draw the power down, because of the way we discussed that the alternator works, to see if it would be detecting a drop in the battery, and then you know, start doing its thing where it flips itself on. But we're not seeing that here. So unless you are sitting in the cab and you turn something on, I don't think it's gonna read a power dip. So I mean, if you left your radio on, it shouldn't have any effect and stuff like that. So well, maybe your radio, because it'll be drawing more power, but anything other than that, I think you're fine. So let's a quick look at that after sitting for a while. Alright, so we got our truck running here, and just came off the choke. It's still a little low on its idle just because it's cold, but as you can see here, real quiet operation. Solid lifter engine clicking away like it should. Some good ka-chunk out the back, but anyway, get our, so that's actually charging a little more than ideal, and it'll come down after it runs for a little bit, warms up, it'll drop down to 14.5. But anyways, you can see this is real low idle and it's charging well, so its voltage regulator is doing its job. We're not charging too high, but we're definitely on the upper end. But overall, we're pretty good. So really got no problems with that. Charges good, puts out good voltage. So Anyway, and then we'll shut her down and take a look at the bleed down. And here we go, we can see the bleed down. And I don't know if it can sense the voltage, so it's trying to get it back down to 12.5. But that's what it'll always come down to after it sits. And I go out and check it after a few days, it'll be back down to 12.5. But anyway, I just wanted to show this bleed down here. But anyway, that's pretty much the end of the video. It runs real good. Some of the caveats of having one of these one-wire alternators that I'm not really a fan of. For one, this power wire is always hot. Now, how it worked before with the voltage regulator here was it'd get a signal from the ignition, and then that would flip it on, instead of how this senses a load. So it would have no power running through it, and you could work around your engine and be fine. But I even did it when I was fooling around. I touched, my wrench to that nut that holds our power wire on. My other elbow was on my radiator, and I felt the electrical current like going through me and shocking me, coming out my elbow on the ground. So you always have to take your battery cables off when you're working around that thing, I guess. I mean, you can get electrocuted, it's not bad, but that's one of the things to be aware of. What I also don't like about it is, you have a voltage drop through this wire. Now, depending on how long this wire is and the gauge of this wire, it'll determine your output voltage. So I got an 8 gauge wire, and we can see that it's a little high, like 14.5. And maybe a 10 gauge wire would work, I'm not sure. I'm going to test it like this, and if something goes wrong, I'll do an update video if it fries my battery. But from my research, it should have an 8 gauge wire on it. But that's just one of the things. The longer this wire is, the more voltage drop you're going to get. And on the other hand, the shorter it is, the less voltage drop. So it's since it's all regulated right there on the alternator, you really don't have any control. So if your battery was in your trunk, you'd have significant voltage drop. So that's something to be aware of. That's another issue with these. But other than that, other than getting shocked and the voltage drop, and kind of how it's scary that it's all self-regulated, and how it has to shut itself off and turn itself or start itself up. And if you have a problem with that, it could drain your battery. So again, we're going to run this for a while and see how our battery holds up and what goes on with it. But I've tested it for about a week now, and we're pretty good. So anyway, that's pretty much at this point my opinion on one-wire alternators. As you can see, real easy to install, and for the street rod, I don't think they're a bad option at all. So anyway, there you have it.